Mama, I give you.
You can send me back, the mail-order bride asked. The cowboy answered, My son already chose you. Dustfield Station, New Mexico Territory. Summer, 1891. The western sun bore down like judgment. Heat shimmered off the dirt tracks and warped the distant horizon. Dust hung in the air, thick and unmoving, painting everything in a permanent shade of rust. Dustfield Station was no place for gentility. Not with its peeling signs, warped floorboards, and the stench of sweat and old whiskey clinging to the walls. Horse hooves clacked against the boards outside. Men cursed loudly in between swigs from bottles. Laughter, mean and sharp, cut through the air like barbed wire. When the train hissed to a stop, its metal wheels grinding against the tracks, only a few passengers disembarked. Most were men, rail workers, traders, a prospector or two. And then, from the very last car, stepped a woman. Rebecca May Hollis. Her dress, once cornflower blue, was dulled by soot and days of travel. The hem was frayed, her gloves smudged, her boots dusty. But she stood straight, her chin held high. One hand clutched a worn valise, the other rested lightly over the letter, folded neatly in the pocket near her heart. She took her first step onto the platform, and the atmosphere shifted. Voices hushed. Eyes turned. A few men near the freight crates looked her over too slowly. One of them laughed, nudging the other with a bottle in hand. "Mail bride," he snorted. "Poor soul doesn't know what she's walking into." Rebecca ignored them. But the sting settled beneath her skin. The only other women in sight were leaning against the saloon porch, corsets tight, faces painted, eyes tired. One of them glanced at Rebecca and gave her a long, quiet look, half warning, half pity, before turning away. Rebecca's heart beat harder. Still, her steps did not falter. She searched the faces, looked for someone holding a sign, or tipping a hat, looked for him. But there was no one. Then a voice, deep, low, hesitant, cut through the noise behind her. "Rebecca Hollis." She turned. The man standing a few feet away was tall, sun-browned, with the hard look of someone used to silence. Weston Tate. His shoulders were wide beneath a dusty coat, his hat shadowing his eyes. He looked like the land itself, carved, weathered, and quiet. His gaze held hers a moment too long. "I never sent for a bride," he said. His voice was rough, slow, almost pained. Rebecca blinked once. She did not look away. Her pride held fast, even as her stomach twisted. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter, the very one that had brought her across the country. She didn't wave it in his face. She simply held it, then said in a voice clear enough for the crowd to hear, "You can send me back." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. The murmurs began again. Some sneered, some turned away. One man let out a low whistle. But then, another voice. Small, unsteady, pure. "Miss Rebecca?" A boy stepped out from behind a wagon. Barely 4, blonde curls tousled, boots too big for his feet. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes wide. He didn't run to her. He didn't speak again. He just walked up beside her, then stepped in front of her, standing between her and the crowd, small arms stiff at his sides, like he could protect her. Weston stared, first at Rebecca, then at the boy. Tommy. It all came together in an instant. The envelope, the writing, the name signed at the bottom. His son. His boy had sent that letter. Weston exhaled slowly. He looked at the faces gathered around, then back at Rebecca. Shame flickered through him, but also something else, something steadier. He didn't reach for her. He didn't apologize. Instead, he lifted his head and said firmly, My son already chose you." And just like that, in the eyes of the town, the matter was settled. He hadn't claimed her out of love, but he had claimed her all the same. A few hours after the confrontation at the station, Dustfield's slow-moving streets were thick with whispers. Nothing drew out the townspeople like the arrival of an unexpected woman, especially one who had been claimed in public, yet walked away alone. Rebecca did not ride back to the ranch with Weston. He had not offered, and she had not asked. He could not. Not with the town watching. Not with eyes peering out from behind curtained windows, and voices already spinning stories faster than truth could travel. Even Weston Tate, with his calm certainty and rooted sense of right, didn't know what came next. And until he did, he wouldn't risk bringing her into his home under a cloud of speculation. The town split quickly into camps. Some said she must be his wife now, after such a declaration, and he ought to bring her home or risk shame. Others insisted she was a con artist, a woman from the East, here to trick a grieving widower into surrendering his land. Still others, mostly older women and drifters, simply didn't want the disruption. They didn't like how she dressed, how she held herself, how she refused to wilt. "Too proud for a mail-order girl," one woman whispered. "Too polished." In the face of all that noise, Weston did what he believed was decent. He arranged for Rebecca to stay at the only room available in town, a narrow, second-floor lodging above the Dustfield saloon. It was not a place for a lady, but there were no inns, no boarding houses, and no homes willing to take her in. He paid in advance and gave her the key without comment. The room was cramped, the window cracked, the bed narrow. The thin walls did nothing to muffle the sounds below. Piano notes struck too hard, laughter too loud, boots stomping and bar stools scraping until long past midnight. Rebecca said nothing. She did not cry. She did not accuse. She unpacked her few things with silent dignity and placed the letter, the one that brought her here, on the table by the window. Then she sat in the only chair in the room and looked down at the street below, where men stumbled out of the saloon and shouted to the night. She kept the oil lamp burning late. It glowed like defiance behind the glass. Down below, Weston did not ride home. He stayed. He borrowed a horse from the sheriff under some vague excuse and tied it up beside the saloon. Then he took a seat on the bench under the overhang, just far enough to stay dry if it rained, just close enough to see the light from her window. He did not go upstairs. He did not speak to anyone. He just sat there, back straight, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the second floor. He watched the lamp flicker. He listened to the town go quiet. And he did not leave until the light went out, close to dawn. The next morning, Rebecca opened her door and stepped out onto the creaking landing. Below her, the bench where Weston had sat was empty now, but a rough, wooden chair sat nearby, dragged up during the night. Its seat was worn smooth, and when she touched it, it was still faintly warm. She looked at it for a long time. He hadn't come up to comfort her, hadn't promised her safety or affection, hadn't said a single word, but he had stayed. And, in Dustfield, that meant more than most men's declarations. Rebecca stepped back inside, closed the door behind her, and let the morning sun fall across her face. She was still a woman without a title, still adrift in the eyes of the town. But she was not alone. And for now, that was enough. The courthouse in Dustfield was little more than a single-room annex beside the chapel, with creaking benches and high windows that let in too much sun and too little breeze. But on that day, it felt like the center of the world. The room was packed. Men who never spoke to one another in town now stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, faces unreadable. Women fanned themselves in the back pews, their eyes sharp, their whispers sharper. Even the preacher stood near the door, arms folded, lips pressed thin. And at the front of it all sat Rebecca. She sat alone, hands gripping the edge of her chair, knuckles white beneath her gloves. Her back was straight, her chin lifted, but the slightest tremble in her fingertips betrayed the weight of the moment. On the table before the town council lay a single sheet of paper, yellowed and folded. The seal had long since crumbled away. One of the councilmen, a gaunt man with a sour mouth and a loud voice, tapped the letter with his knuckle. "This," he declared, "is what brought her here. A letter written under the name of Weston Tate." He unfolded it, careful and slow, like unveiling a crime. Then he read it aloud. "My pa is real sad. I think he needs someone who can smile big. If you come, maybe he'll smile again." The words, written in shaky, childish print, filled the room like thunder. Some folks chuckled under their breath. Others turned away, uncomfortable. The councilman continued, voice cold. "Here lies a deception. A woman was summoned under false pretense, creating unrest in this town. It is our duty to determine whether that deception was accidental or criminal." He folded the letter again, placed it back on the table, and looked toward Weston. No one had called on Tommy. But outside the nearest window, just behind the glass, a small face appeared. Tommy stood quietly on his toes, his little hands resting on the sill. His eyes, round and solemn, watched every word, his breath fogging the corner of the glass. He didn't speak, he didn't move. Inside, Rebecca turned her head slightly, just enough to catch Weston in her periphery. He was sitting still, as always, but his fingers tapped against his leg, a quiet, unconscious rhythm. Then, slowly, he stood. No one stopped him. He walked to the front of the room, boots thudding against the wooden floor. He didn't look at Rebecca. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at the letter. And then he spoke. "The letter carries my name," he said. "That's enough. I accept the fault." A rustle moved through the crowd. "You admit," one of the councilmen asked, "to misleading this woman?" "I admit the letter was sent under my name," Weston replied, voice low but firm. "And I accept what comes with that." Another man leaned forward. "Even if it cost you your reputation, your trade, your standing in this town?" Weston's answer was calm. "She came here in good faith. That deserves honor, not punishment." The verdict came after a hushed discussion. Weston would pay a fine. More than that, he would be suspended from all cattle trading and sales within the region for 6 months, an enormous loss for a rancher in the height of season. Weston nodded once. Then he turned to the room, gaze level, steady. "She doesn't go," he said. "I do." And with that, he walked back to his seat, sat down, and folded his hands. He didn't glance at Rebecca. But she was already looking at him. No one clapped. No one spoke. Because they all understood, he hadn't done it for love. He had done it because it was right. Because she deserved someone to stand, even when the ground shook beneath them. Rebecca did not speak to Weston after the town hearing. Not out of anger toward him, but out of shame toward herself. She had walked into Dustfield on her own 2 feet, carrying her story, her choice, and her name. Yet, when it mattered, someone else had stood for her. Someone had taken the weight, the judgment, the cost, and that left a taste in her mouth she could not swallow. So the next morning, without a word to anyone, she left the saloon room and walked east of town, toward the mining camp. No stagecoaches went that way. No carriages. Only rickety wagons and mule tracks through dry scrub and loose rock. But she walked it all the same. At the edge of the settlement, where shanties leaned against one another like drunkards and children ran barefoot through smoke, she found what she was looking for. A broken barn, 3 walls standing, no roof, and the smell of rust and ash. A woman tending a cook fire nearby gave her a sideways glance. Rebecca stepped forward. "I used to teach in Baltimore," she said, voice calm. "I can teach here too." The woman snorted. "Ain't no school here, lady." "There will be." That was all she said. No one helped. She swept out the old barn with a tree branch. She gathered crates for chairs. She used coal from the fire pits to draw letters on broken slate. For 3 days, the children only watched her. Then, one by one, they started to sit down. By the end of the week, she had a class. No pay, no lunch, no walls against the wind. But she had students, and that was enough. What she did not know, what she could not know, was that Weston Tate had been watching from a distance, and that on the 7th day he walked his black stallion, Shadow, the finest horse he had ever broken, down to the trading post. The buyer was from Arizona, and he paid in full, in cash. Weston refused a commission, refused to name the reason, just said, "Take good care of him," then turned and left. That money found its way into the hands of the church. A sealed envelope, no signature. Inside was enough to fix the roof of the barn, enough for benches, slates, chalk, a real bell. The preacher delivered it to Rebecca 2 days later, saying only, "Seems God's found you a quiet benefactor." She was grateful, but curious. Later that afternoon, while passing the Tate Ranch on her walk back into town, she noticed something. The corral was too quiet. She paused at the fence and looked closer. Shadow was gone. The space he always stood was empty. She stood there for a long while. That evening, she went to Weston's home. He opened the door, calm as ever, his eyes steady, his hands rough from the day's work. She didn't accuse him. She didn't ask why. She just stood on his porch and said, "You sold him." Weston didn't nod, didn't confirm. He didn't need to. She stepped forward, looked at him fully. "You didn't save me," she said, voice low. "You gave me room to save myself." And then she turned, walked back into the fading light, leaving him alone on the porch, the breeze tugging at his shirt. He said nothing, but he watched her until she disappeared over the hill, just as he always did. The sky turned gray without warning, casting the town in a cold, dull light. Clouds settled low, like the heavens themselves were holding their breath. A polished carriage rolled into Dustfield, out of place among the chipped wagons and mule carts. Its wheels moved with purpose, not the hesitation of a traveler, but the certainty of someone returning to claim what he believed was his. The man who stepped down wore a dark vest. His boots shined to a mirror gleam. A gold chain crossed his chest, anchored to a pocket watch he checked with mild disdain. His coat did not hold dust. His eyes did not seek permission. They scanned the townsfolk like he was reviewing a staff or a ledger. He asked for no directions. He did not shout. He simply walked to the sheriff's office and handed over a bundle of documents. A marriage contract. A letter of engagement, signed in Baltimore. A formal accusation of desertion. And a petition for moral review of Dustfield's response. When the sheriff emerged with him into the open air, his tone was cautious. "There's a man here claiming legal guardianship over Miss Rebecca Hollis." The town quieted. The man didn't wait for Rebecca to come to him. He turned toward the middle of Main Street and spoke like he was addressing a courtroom. "She is my responsibility," he declared. "By agreement, by family arrangement, and by every moral measure, she belongs with me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Rebecca stepped into the street. She didn't look shaken. She didn't glance toward Weston's ranch or the saloon balcony where the eyes were already watching. She walked slowly, purposefully, and when she stopped in front of the man who once held her future like a deed, she lifted her chin and said evenly, "If I was yours, You wouldn't have to come this far." Something shifted in the crowd. No one cheered, but no one moved either. He held out the papers again. "The law is not optional in this territory." Rebecca's lips curled faintly. It wasn't optional in Maryland either. And yet, here I am. The man's confidence flickered, just slightly. Then Weston stepped from the side alley, boots steady on the wooden planks. He said nothing at first, simply approached until he was within reach. He didn't speak to Rebecca, didn't confront the man. He placed one hand on her shoulder, firm, calm. She did not flinch. Then he looked at the man who had come to claim her and said quietly, "She stays, because she chooses to." No threat, no need, just truth, spoken from a place deeper than pride. The man looked between them. For a brief second, he seemed to calculate how much power he truly had left in a town that did not bow to contracts written back east. And in that second, he realized he had already lost. The air felt lighter after the man from the east rode out of Dustfield, but nothing had truly settled. The storm had passed, yes, but it had left behind debris no one dared move. Rebecca remained in the same room above the saloon. Her window faced the street, her curtains drawn half the time. The whispers no longer carried the sting of accusation, but their weight had not lessened. In the eyes of the town, she had been defended, yes, but not claimed, not truly, not where it mattered. She walked to and from the mining camp each day, taught the children with steady resolve, and helped the church organize supplies for the makeshift school. Her steps were even, her voice calm, but inside her, something hung between waiting and weariness. Weston knew. He had watched her from a distance long enough. He found her inside the church, sleeves rolled, sorting through a crate of slates and old books. The air smelled of dust and wax. She didn't hear him enter, but when she looked up, he was already standing there, hat in hand, shoulders squared like he was bracing for a shootout. He did not greet her. He simply said, "It's time." Rebecca blinked. "Time for what?" His voice was steady, with that low, rooted tone that always meant he'd already made up his mind. "You've paid your debts, faced your past. I've stood by you in town, but I won't let you sleep another night above a saloon." She frowned, straightening. "I am not your burden, Weston." He stepped closer, not aggressive, but unmovable. "You're not a burden. You're my choice." Her breath caught. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. No romance, no decoration, just a plain, stubborn truth. He turned and walked out, left the door open behind him. She followed. He rode ahead on horseback. She followed with her bag in the back of a cart lent by the preacher. No words, just the road. Dust between them, but not distance. When they reached the ranch, Weston dismounted first. He didn't point her toward the barn or a side room. He opened the front door of the house and took her valise from the cart like it was the most natural thing in the world. No fanfare, no explanation. Inside, the hearth had been cleaned. The floor swept. A small fire waited in the grate, and the faint scent of lavender drifted from the open window. A bouquet of wildflowers, yellow-petaled, mountain-grown, rested in a chipped vase by the sill, the same kind of flower planted beside his late wife's grave. Tommy ran in from the yard, dirt on his knees, and hope in his voice. "Ma's home." Weston did not flinch. He did not correct him. Rebecca froze. Her fingers still clutched the strap of her bag. Weston said nothing, only carried the bag to the fireplace and set it down. Then he pointed toward the hallway. "You'll sleep in the big room. I'll take the office for now." She didn't argue. He added, without turning back, "We'll figure the rest in time." Later, she walked into the kitchen and found the pots scrubbed. A bucket of fresh water set near the back door, and the table cleared. There was a folded cloth, clean, unused, and beside it, a spoon carved from cedar, small, clearly meant for a child's hand. It hadn't been there before. That night, she stood in the doorway of the bedroom. It smelled of sun-dried linens and old pine. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing the quilt's stitching. She did not feel like a guest. She did not feel like a replacement. For the first time, she did not feel alone. Not in this house, not in the heart of the man who had never once said he loved her. Because he didn't need to. The letter came folded in stiff parchment, sealed with red wax and stamped with the insignia of the regional court. It arrived, not by mistake, but by vengeance. Rebecca read it first, hands steady, eyes unflinching. Weston read it after her, jaw tight, the lines in his face deepening. The letter was a formal complaint, filed by her former fiancé. It accused Weston of unlawfully harboring a woman under false pretense and coercing her into remaining in Dustfield. It was legal, it was cold, and it was meant to shame. A week later, a federal agent rode into town. He wore a tailored coat, carried a revolver that had never seen Dustfield dirt, and walked like he expected compliance. He came to question Weston Tate, but the town had changed. When the agent stepped into the saloon to ask for directions, he was met with silence. When he reached the church to look for records, he found the pews filled, not with prayers, but with people. Mothers from the mining camp. Fathers who had seen their children read for the first time. The store owner. The old ranch hand. And children, too. Their hands ink-smudged from the letters they'd learned to write. Rebecca stood at the back. She did not speak. She did not need to. The preacher stepped forward, eyes firm, voice calm. That woman has done more for this town than anyone on your payroll. The agent, to his credit, listened. He reviewed the letter. He asked his questions. He walked the grounds of the mining camp school and saw the blackboard, the desks, the children practicing their names. He returned to his quarters and wrote a single-page dismissal. Voluntary relocation, no coercion, stable community contribution. With that, the file was closed. Rebecca was no longer a fugitive of promises never freely made. She was free, in law, and in name. That night, the summer storm rolled in. Wind howled through the canyons, and rain washed the dust from rooftops and fields. A fence post near the barn collapsed under the weight of the wind. After the worst had passed, Weston went out with hammer and wire, working beneath a silver sky still flickering with lightning in the distance. Rebecca followed, holding a lantern. She said nothing, just set it on the fence beside him and watched. Weston glanced up. His hands paused. His eyes met hers. "I never asked properly," he said, "but you're already my wife in everything that matters." Rebecca tilted her head, rain still dripping from the ends of her hair. "Then let's say it out loud," she whispered. "Not for them, for us." A week later, they stood beside the creek behind the ranch. The preacher stood between them, Bible in hand, his voice carried gently by the wind. Rebecca wore a plain linen dress, hand-sewn and sun-bleached. Weston wore a clean white shirt, ironed stiff but softened by his callous touch. Tommy stood nearby, holding a single sprig of lavender, face bright with quiet joy. There were no rings, but there were vows. Words not shouted, not performed, but spoken from the marrow, of gratitude, of promise, of choosing each other not just in love, but in the small, hard work of staying. They did not need a crowd. The creek bore witness. And that was enough. 1 year later, the ranch looked different. Not larger, not richer, but fuller. The garden behind the house was thriving. Rows of squash, beans, and tomatoes climbed the wooden lattice Rebecca had built with Tommy. There were chickens now, a fence freshly painted, and a line of laundry swaying like prayer flags across the yard. Inside the front room, the old parlor had been turned into a schoolroom. 6 children came each morning, some from nearby homesteads, others from the mining camp. Rebecca taught them letters, numbers, and how to speak their minds kindly. Tommy, now 5, was the first to arrive and the last to leave. One afternoon, as they stacked books and swept the floor, he looked up with wide eyes and said, "We built this place, didn't we, Ma?" Rebecca paused, a softness blooming in her chest. "Yes," she said, "we did." Weston still didn't speak much, but he passed through the house like a steady rhythm. His hands fixed broken drawers, chopped wood before anyone asked, and left warm bread on the table each morning. He touched Rebecca gently as he passed, a hand on her back, a brush of fingers along her arm, not out of show, but out of habit. They never needed to say they were husband and wife. They simply lived like it. Each morning began together. Each evening ended with the 3 of them beneath the same roof, with the same silence that now felt like peace. One day, Rebecca hung something new on the wall of the schoolroom, a wooden frame, hand-carved, holding a single yellowed letter. The handwriting inside was crooked, childlike. "My pa is real sad. I think he needs someone who can smile big." A little girl with a missing front tooth pointed at it. "What does it mean?" Rebecca smiled, her hands folded in front of her apron. "It means someone believed love could fix something. Grown-ups forgot how to heal." The children didn't fully understand, but they were quiet for a moment, looking at the letter like it might answer something they hadn't yet learned to ask. That evening, as the sun melted across the plains, Rebecca sat on the porch beside Weston. Tommy lay between them, drowsy from the day, his head on her lap. The wind was soft. The sky stretched wide and orange, brushing the edge of the world. Weston reached over and took her hand. He didn't squeeze it. He just held it there, like he meant to, like he would. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The house stood behind them, warm and alive. The boy who wrote the letter no longer needed to fix what was broken, because now they had built something whole, and they had done it by choice. If this story touched something quiet in your heart, if you believe love can still be chosen, built, and held with gentle hands, then saddle up and stay a while. There's more where this came from. Hit that like button if Rebecca, Weston, and little Tommy reminded you that family isn't always born. Sometimes it's written in letters, forged in storms, and sealed with the quiet courage to stay. And don't forget to where every tale rides through dust, danger, and devotion, and always leaves an echo behind. We've got more untamed hearts and forgotten romances on the trail ahead. Join us, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't.